Once upon a time there was a wedding dress. She was lovingly made by the bride and her mother, stitched from the finest raw silk, with poofy sleeves and a big skirt. On that amazing wedding day in 1988, she graced the bride as she walked down the aisle, and everyone praised the beautiful wedding dress. She was so proud. And when the wedding was over, the wedding dress was lovingly and caringly cleaned, put into a protective plastic bag, and given pride of place in the attic. She was happy to tell the other items up there about the wedding and the part she had played in it. After a while, she was moved to a different attic. She was accompanied by other, newer arrivals. Strollers, baby clothes, toys. She moved again and again, and began to feel rather forgotten. Until one day, when someone new came up to the attic. Hi, and welcome to the Petticoated Swashbuckler. So that was a bit of a silly fairy tale, but that is the story of my mum's wedding dress. Now, about 2 months ago, my sister gave birth to a beautiful baby girl, and my family together agreed that my mum's old wedding dress should be given new life as her baptismal gown. So I cut the skirts of the dress, and I cut all the pieces from the skirts. 2 of the skirt panels I just left as they was because they were beautifully flared. A burn test revealed that the lining fabric had quite a lot of man-made fibres, so I opted for a new lining made of very soft cotton instead, to be kind to baby skin. I struggled with the colour quite a bit, but I managed something I was happy with in the end. And this is how far I've come. Isn't it cute? Now, there's still some hand sewing left to be done. So what I thought I'd do today is I'm going to stitch on this one while talking with you about the history of baptismal clothing. Now, being baptized as a baby is not something that's common for all denominations of Christianity. And being dressed in something special and given a name is definitely not something that's uniquely Christian. I will, however, focus on the history of Norway and specifically, and also North Europe more generally, which will be mostly a story of Christianity, of Catholicism for the Middle Ages, and then Protestantism after the 1530s approximately. But that does not mean that that's the only important bits. That's just because that's what I know and where I live. Now, first of all, the early Christians were usually not baptized as babies. Baptism tended to be something you went through as an adult when you converted to Christianity. And I didn't really find much sources for baby baptisms before the 200s AD. And for most of the history of baptism, children tend to wear what they wear to any occasion. And for about 1500 years, that was swaddling. Babies were swaddled. It's when you take a long, thin strip of cloth and you wind it quite tightly around the body of a baby. And people did this because they believed that babies were born with soft bones. So they believed that babies needed that kind of rigidity to grow into healthy and tall and beautiful adults. It seems like swaddling was the common thing throughout late antiquity and the Middle Ages. I did find some swaddling bands, Norwegian swaddling bands, that are much later. They're from like the 18th, 19th century, which is long after most people had stopped. Most countries in Europe and most parts of America had stopped swaddling altogether. And these are beautiful. They are embroidered and they're gorgeous. Now, in the Middle Ages, swaddling was common. However, a lot of children were carried to their baptism in a special kind of blanket. The only English name I found for this is bearing cloth. So it's basically a piece of clothing to be carried in. And I found this beautiful one from Norwich Castle Museum. It is velvet and it's from 1667 and it's absolutely splendid. Whereas this one from Norway is a lot more kind of homely and probably homemade, but it's still pretty. And this was probably made in the 20th century. So again, a long time after most of the Western world had stopped swaddling and stopped using bearing cloths. Now, according to several sources I found, in the 1600s, baptisms began to be a sort of fully submerged affair, which probably aided the shift from swaddling to other kinds of baby clothes that were easier to put on and take off. And I'm guessing one of the reasons why swaddling kept being used in Norway for a much longer time is because I haven't really found any evidence that babies in Norway were ever fully submerged. Perhaps it's a climate thing. If you baptize your baby in mid-January, you do not want to submerge it or it will die of pneumonia. But I don't know, this is just my theory. And instead of the swaddling and the bearing cloth, people started wearing little pieces that were easy to like take off and put on again. And we do have those pieces in Norway as well. Things like bibs, sleeves, forehead cloths, caps. They do also turn up in Norway. Bibs called bleie, very, very common, it seems. And they were usually worn on top of a swaddled baby in Norway. So, like this one. Now, baptismal caps were also very, very popular in Norway. And they survive in surprising numbers for, like, baby clothes. They could be quite simple and white, like this one, which looks almost modern. But just as often, strong colours and fancy fabrics were very, very popular. Silks and velvets were illegal for most Norwegians to wear, but a little bit on like a baby's cap, not that illegal, very difficult to like arrest someone. Who owns that silk cap? Well, it's that baby over there, you can arrest him. Today we tend to like colour code babies. I am going to put a pink ribbon on this dress because I think it'll look cute and I think my sister will enjoy it. However, in the 17th and 18th century in Norway, you didn't colour code your baby. Boys and girls didn't wear like blue and pink. However, the shape of the cap could tell you whether it was a boy or a girl. So you could have a pink cap that was very obviously for boys, for people who knew what they were looking for, which I find quite interesting. I did find one type of baptismal clothing that seems fairly unique to Norway, or at least to like Scandinavia, and that's the baptismal cloak or hood or bag. It could be constructed either as a long hood, a long cloak, or some sort of ornate sleeping bag. And I haven't really found anything similar for like England, France, Germany. So if you know of examples that are not Scandinavian of the kind of baptismal hood or cloak, please let me know. I would love to find out. Now, the most historical about this dress that I'm making now is probably that it is a redesign. That was very common, to take something that was maybe out of fashion, maybe didn't fit anymore, maybe a little bit worn, or for other reasons could not be worn anymore, and cut that up and use that for the baby's baptismal clothing. And remaking a grandmother's wedding dress to create a baptismal gown seems very historical somehow. It wouldn't have been white though in the period. It seems like red was the most common colour for everything that was kind of special and fancy and party. So baptismal clothing, wedding clothing, but definitely remaking stuff, always been done. Over the course of the 19th century, most Norwegians seem to have gone from the combination of like swaddling and the little bibs on top and maybe like the cloak or the hood or the bag, and towards the kind of classic white dress. Sometimes though in combination with the hood or cloak thing. Sometimes dresses weren't entirely white. Sometimes they were made of wool or cotton or silk or even knitted. But now all of the baptismal clothes throughout history up until the 19th century seem to be some sort of version of everyday baby wear. How about the white baptism gown? I found several websites that claim that this is just a version of adult clothing for babies. But is that true? Absolutely not. This is actually a version of 19th century baby wear. Now, dressing a baby in the 19th century was completely different from dressing a baby today. But it would also have been quite different from dressing a baby in, say, 1750. Swaddling mostly gone by the early 19th century, although as we saw in Norway, it stayed on in more remote areas for much longer. But for most of Europe, and I think these examples are from English because I wanted the English words for it. So these examples are from English history, but I found similar clothing for most of the Western world for the 19th century. So first you need a binder, and that's instead of swaddling, but it's kind of a remnant of it, where you have a long flannel kind of ribbon or piece of cloth, and you wind that around the rib cage and abdomen of the baby. And it is to provide support, it's to provide warmth, and it's kind of a rest of the swaddling. I have worn a modern binder that can be quite like constrictive. The baby binders weren't that kind of harsh. It's just because, like I said, people were really, really worried about their babies not growing right because their bones were too soft and not supported. Now, on top of that, you would wear nappies, of course, or diapers, depending on where you live, what you want to call them. Fabric, of course, that you needed laundering, and on top of that, you would have like a nappy cover called pilch, which was made of something waterproof to prevent leakages. And on top of that again, you would wear a shirt, very, very simple, white cotton shirt, cap sleeves, as few seams as possible, because you didn't want the seams to irritate the baby's skin. And if you think, well, that sounds good, are we done? No, we are not. That's just kind of the first layer. On top of binder, nappy, pilcher, and the shirt, you're going to wear something called a barrow coat or a whittle or a barrow. It has so many different names. It is basically a very simple flannel bodice, usually just a strap with like little loops of ribbon for going over the arms, and then skirts sewn onto it. And this is where the skirts start to come in. The skirts should be at least 6 inches longer than a baby. And on top of that, you would wear a petticoat. I'm saying your baby would wear a petticoat. If you're a baby watching YouTube, how? That's impressive. But your baby would wear a petticoat. Sleeveless white gown with long skirts. And often trimmed, especially at the hem, because that was the bit that people would see. And on top of the petticoat, you would wear a frock. Again, your baby would wear a frock. And it would be very simple to the petticoat. It's very, very similar to the petticoat. Simple white cotton sleeveless dress, but more trimmed, because this is where people would see it. So if you could afford it, you would trim it. You would wear lace and stuff like that. And then you would put a cap on your baby, much like the baptismal caps. And that's it. So your baby would be covered in like 5 layers of wool, cotton, on their upper body, and long flowing skirts, and then bare arms. I mean, they would wear like a cloak if they were going outdoors, but still, Victorian parents were terrified of overdressing their babies. They wanted hard, strong babies, and they believed that they would become hard and strong if they were exposed to cold weather apparently, which I find so strange, because when I'm cold, my freezing always starts on my arms and my upper body. But yeah, I'm not a Victorian baby. I don't know how I would have felt about it. But yeah, many layers, long skirts, nothing on your sleeves. I don't know why the dresses were that long. It's not a gender thing. Cut and colour and shape and materials really were very similar regardless of class and gender. For all babies. More trim and lace and stuff if you were wealthy, but that's pretty much the biggest difference. In fact, if you were a poorer baby, you might wear more kind of flannelly fabrics and be warmer than a fancy rich baby wearing muslin. It might have something to do with warmth, and it might also have something to do with the baby having something to grow in, because I have found sources that recommend that when your baby starts crawling, instead of just chopping off the lower hem of your dress so it's easier for the baby to crawl in, you make completely new petticoats and frocks that are kind of ankle length. And then you make ones that are progressively shorter in the skirts to make it easier for babies starting to walk. Instead of just cutting the first dress you made, because you will probably have more babies and it will be very handy to have a long dress when that happens. So that's interesting. So it's definitely a sort of long dress, small baby, shorter dress, older child kind of situation. And looking at the few surviving baby clothes that exist, it is actually very hard to tell if it's a baptismal dress or just a fancy frock. Now, when I'm done with this little baptismal gown, I am going to try my hand at making a traditional Norwegian baptismal hood or coat, cloak, yeah, whatever you want to call it. I have this beautiful embroidered silk fabric in my stash that I bought ages ago and I haven't found a use for yet. And since red is a traditional colour, I'm going to go for this. I also have this, which is a remnant from my 1837 dress for lining. I will use these 3 cloaks as a starting point, as they are from the region where my sister and her family live. I have no pattern for this. I don't know if they've been made at all for the last 100 years, but they seem simple enough. They are about 90 centimeters wide at the hem, and then the body or the hood seems to be narrowed by a number of darts, down to about 50 or 60 centimeters. The entire garment, usually 110 to 120 centimeters long, and the hood is a little shorter than half. So that means that the hood is not just to cover the baby's head, it's to cover most of the baby's body, actually. Some of them are kind of rounded at the hem, some of them are left square. I think I'm going to round mine because I find that cute. And I'm going to trim with some matching ribbons. And the originals do not seem to be lined or padded with anything, so I'm just going to leave mine as well. She'll be baptised in September, so it won't be freezing cold, I'm hoping. Now, as this white wedding dress is remade from my mum's wedding gown, I'm also having fun mixing and matching historical periods here and leaving some 1980s wedding dress elements in. One of the things I have left is, my mum's wedding dress had a beautiful V-shaped bodice, so I have tried to keep that in here, a little bit of V. Because my mum had big flared skirts, I'm leaving the skirts flared and big. And because she had big 80s poofy sleeves, I've also given the little one poofy sleeves. They're so cute. So I'm now just going to finish stitching up my seam allowances and adding some buttons to the back, some ribbons, and then I'm ready. In addition to the dress and the cloak, my niece will also have a small lace cap that was made by my grandmother, the same who made the wedding dress. And this entire project has just felt like one giant cooperation between me and my grandmother, which has been so lovely. She died many years ago, and she was really, really great with her hands, with sewing and embroidery and knitting and all of those kind of haberdashery things. And I wish I'd been more into it while she was still alive, because I think we'd have a lot of fun together. So I'm kind of feeling like I get to do that now, even though it's a little bit too late. And I just know that she would have been super interested in everything that I'm doing, all my sewing projects, everything. She would have been my greatest supporter, and she would have loved everything, and she would have loved dressing up with me. I wish she was still alive so I can put a funny hat on her and take her for a picnic. But I can't. What I'm going to do instead is I'm going to keep her legacy alive with this one and give her creations new life. So thank you for coming along on this little fairy tale / lecture / stitch and talk. I'll be back in a fortnight. Then we'll do something completely different. I'll try and dress like a spy. But until then, bye!